Tony Davis,
Tony Hauser,
episode
number 20. It's a special one, Tony. It's
special
number
one,
25.
special one.
Yes.
Yay! Cake.
I personally have some celebratory fizzy water.
Cool. Yeah. Yeah. So Redgate reviewed the budget, and
That's what they came up with, I know.
yeah,
We were
that's
quite
what
impressed.
I had to inflate it myself, but
Yeah.
still, thanks,
I was only
Redgate.
expecting like one tier. It's got 3.
Thanks.
That's quite. Thanks, Redgate. Cheers.
Yeah. Cheers. Cheers, Redgate. No, thanks for having us in this channel because we can talk about cool articles product learning got this week or the past.
Yeah. We have a particularly interesting article this week.
Yeah, we promised a Tonie article, but this is not just one Tonie. This is the Tonie.
It's this Tony,
Yeah, Tonie.
the younger, better looking Tony.
Yeah. Okay, we will cut this part out.
We will cut that part out. No blatant lies on this show. We won't
Yeah, of
tolerate
course.
it.
Younger Tony. This is future Tony. Past Tony, please tell me. I know.
So yes, I've written a little article about automated state-based deployments in Flyway. The reason being that, well, Flyway is obviously known as a migration tool. You write, or you have a tool generate versioned migration scripts for every change, and your developers test them, verify them, make sure they preserve all existing data, and then commit them, and that's how development proceeds. But so why introduce state-based? So this is kind of like a strategic article about why state-based. Who does it suit best? What problems is that team facing? What are their current process look like that makes state-based a good fit? So that's essentially what it's about.
Oh, I forgot to put on the party lights. Sorry, it's now on.
Have we got to start again?
No, absolutely not. No, but during this 25 episode, I'm a little bit nervous, and that's why I forgot to put on the party lights. So, but the party lights are now. So,
okay, cool. Yeah.
But I was paying attention because when you started this story about state-based, it's actually something that a lot of Redgate users are using when they're using source control. So SQL source control, for example. So seeing the new shiny thing, Flyway and Flyway Desktop for years now, it is not easy to just go to migration based. And I think with your strategic article, with explaining how state based works and why it's a good idea in a certain point in time or a project to use state based, it's also interesting to look. But this is step 1, and from this step, you could easily go to migration based.
Exactly right. So I think the point I tried to make is that a lot of teams, as you just pointed out, are familiar with a development process for the database that is kind of state based. It's like it says, this is what we want the final state of the database to look like, and that might just be a shared database that looks as the team want the production database to eventually look, or it might be some manual scripting that's going on, object scripting that's going on, or it might be that they use a tool like SQL source control. So they have some way of doing that already, but the problem is they're suffering from the knock-on effect sometimes of that is that you get sort of like slightly unreliable deployments. You say this is what the state we want, but you don't have a particularly reliable way to translate that into and this is the script that we know is going to reproduce that state in production and not cause any issues and not lose any data and so on. So it's, if you're familiar with the process, but you need more control over deployments, I think a tool like state-based deployments in Flyway might help you do that.
Yeah, and of course, it is a powerful way of working because you do a last-minute comparison and then generate a migration script.
Exactly right. So the team doesn't have to completely change to a process where they have to verify every change themselves. They can just maintain the state that they want the database to look, and then let Flyway generate this synchronization script in effect that will make production look like the new state.
Yeah, and the state is everything that's in the schema model folders that are already in a Flyway desktop project. So it's actually just a Flyway desktop workflow, but without the migration files, right?
Yes. So if I think you've scrolled. Yes. So then that top diagram there you just scrolled past, it shows the team sharing. It's actually showing the team working on dedicated development databases, which I think a tool like Flyway Statebase will make simpler if you currently use shared databases, but you could be using a shared database too. And you're working in your IDE like usual. You're making changes to the database, and then you're letting Flyway automatically detect those changes and save them to a schema model. So you're
Yeah.
maintaining the schema model in version control, and you're committing those changes to version control.
Yeah,
So the latest
but
state is always there.
that is what I'm also doing in my normal Flyway desktop workflow. So getting the stuff from my database into schema model, Flyway will take care of that, and
Yeah,
we'll just create a new commit for Git, for example,
yeah,
to show the differences. But that that is where this workflow now stops, because this workflow says, "Thank you for these new schema model changes," and whenever I'm going to deploy, that's when I'm bothering to think of, okay, how should I deploy this?
yes,
While in my normal workflow I used to work with, I already put those changes in a separated file. But not only
it's
one file, those files pile up until my uh, initial deployment or my final deployment.
exactly right. So instead of save the schema model change, capture the version migration script, repeat until this is like save your schema model changes, save your schema model changes, and then once a database is in the state you want it to look like, then you think, okay, I can regenerate this synchronization script. And that uses the Flyway prepare and deploy commands. So prepare does a diff between the new development version, as represented by the schema model in version control, and the current production version.
Mm-hmm.
It produces a deployment script. Doesn't have a version number. This is a deployment script. That's why I call it kind of a synchronization script.
It is.
You review it, and then deploy will run it, and it will synchronize the current production database. So
Yeah.
its schema matches that of your new development version.
I think that the choice of words is exactly accurate, because in a Flyway normal workflow, you version a database, and here you synchronize the database. So that's the difference.
That's exactly right. And I think, this workflow is kind of also suited to, I mean, correct me if you think I'm wrong, but if you don't have great version control processes set up yet, the state-based approach gives you quite a lot of kind of extra flexibility. So here we're saying the new dev version is represented by a schema model, but you
Mm-hmm.
could also, for example, get the new version of the database, test it thoroughly, say, okay, we approve of everything. This is exactly how we want the database to look. It works. You could get a snapshot of that database and compare that to production. So,
Absolutely, absolutely.
so you're kind of saying we know what we tested is what we're going to release, because that's sometimes a problem when you don't have those good controls in place with Git or whatever.
Yeah, well, if you're not that familiar with using Git or with branching strategy, or you have a production or test database in your example, because both databases will be deployed by these one-time deployment script,
Yeah,
and it's generated over and over again. So it will be generated for the test database, but it will also be regenerated for the production database, and it can be particularly handy if the test database isn't versioned. You don't know exactly what's in there, but what you
yes,
do know is that you want to compare it with whatever is in schema model, and the same applies to production. And of course, there's also a catch, because with deck packs you do the same. I mean, the state-based way of working is the same as deck packs. Although you
exactly.
can also use migrations these days with deck packs, but that's another story. But the point I wanted to make is that if someone puts a change in production without the Flyway schema model or state-based workflow, it will be detected by the compare, and it will just be thrown away. So that's of course the catch, because it's not versioned. You don't know what exactly is in the database, and it will always be synchronized with whatever is in schema model. That's the only catch.
Well, you can build in drift. I'll come to that in a minute. You can build in drift checks into the state-based approach.
Okay.
Yeah. So,
Oh,
but I mean, so I cover here first a few. The idea that this state-based approach is great. If what you do a lot is update stored procedures, code objects. If what you do a lot is actually directly alter tables, change the schema in that way, that in ways that might affect data, then Flyway will tell you, give you warnings that I don't necessarily know how to come up with a synchronization script that will preserve your data. If you're coming into that sort of problem quite a bit, that might be a neat reason to change to migration based as well.
yeah. Well, we come to that in
Oh,
the
we do.
conclusion.
I've jumped ahead a bit,
In
mate.
the conclusion, but you were looking at the clock and you already saw that we were being recording for over 11 minutes.
Oh
So
gosh, yes. So this,
I totally understand. But first, the drift thing you're saying. So of course you can use drifts, of course, but with a drift, to determine it's a drift, you have to take a snapshot from whatever it looks like. And when taking a snapshot, you're already versioning your database. You see where I'm going?
I do see where you're going. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Okay, but maybe we can discuss that in another episode of the Tony and Tony Show,
yes,
because we are now almost at 12
yes.
minutes. And
There's a checks you can incorporate into state based and make it a bit more controllable, a bit more.
but the thing you wanted to mention is that I wrote one of my first articles for Redgate, and that's about the journey we had as a team moving to this migration-based approach. And
Exactly
you
right.
you linked, thank you for that, Tony, in episode 25 to my first articles, one of my first articles. But you also linked to a more simpler three-step approach of doing this, written in the documentation by the fine people of Redgate.
Well, I think the link there in the where it says move to a migration based approach. That's your article, and it shows you the process changes you went through, and the like cultural changes as well, the ways of working changes that you had to go through to switch to a migration based approach. If you want to do that, there is like a little simple process. There's a 3-step process in the documentation that says just do this, do the other, and you'll be kind of converted to a migration based approach. I don't think it's that simple, because there's a cultural change going on there as well. Your developers suddenly have to test all their own migration scripts
Of course.
for every change.
I've been to invited to another podcast, and David, the host of the podcast, asked me, "What is the hardest thing in DevOps in your work?" People. I said people.
Yeah.
They are also the nicest thing in my work, but
Yeah.
changing culture, changing processes, all involves people, and the tools we discuss in our episodes, Flyway or whatever tool, with certain approaches, migration based, state based approach, all comes down to the process the people do. So yeah, it's a culture change as well. But nevertheless, click
But
the
you have
link.
flexibility in the tool now. I mean, if for right now the state-based approach suits your team, you can use it. Once you're ready, once you've understood some of the issues you're going to run up against and how to deal with them, you can move to a migration-based approach, which gives you the full control over every single migration script.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's that stepping stone you might need to get to a migration based approach. It's just
Exactly right.
but it wasn't there, and it's now available or soon available in Flyway. Or is it already available?
I believe by the time you see this video, you will be hearing all about it, not just from us.
Ooh, and it will be cake.
Yay!
Or no cake for this state based. No cake, no cake. Okay, no cake.
Right,
Okay.
Tony, we've indulged in a slightly longer episode for our 25th anniversary, but
Yeah, well, it was a special one. So
it was. We're
yeah,
allowed, and it was a special Tony article, and there was
there
many.
was a very special Tony article. So thank you, Tony, for this, and thank you for episode 25. Next one will be a Phil article again.
It
But
would be a Phil
this,
Factor article.
yes, but this anniversary one was yours. And see you on the next episode.
See you next time, Sony. Cheers.